I think one of the worst things you can do is not listen to your people. They get frustrated, right?
Yeah.
So you need to allow them to do that. And then it's going to generate more and more ideas. I'm going to teach it the same way in terms of I want them to have the discipline of how to think through and solve problems. And it really doesn't matter whether you're using DMAIC or A3. It doesn't make any difference in reality if you can think through that process and you have a disciplined process. That's half the battle.
Welcome to KPI Fireside. Our mission is simple: to improve companies and to improve careers through continuous improvement. In every episode, we explore the spark, the moment, the mindset, or the method that ignites real change. Whether you're just starting out or leveling up, you'll find the insights and inspiration to fuel your next improvement. Welcome back to KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. I am your host, Keith Norris. Today, our guest is Darren Dolcemascolo. Darren is a lean leadership expert and senior partner at EMS Consulting Group. He works with organizations to develop leaders who can coach, engage teams, and build a culture of continuous improvement. With over 2 decades of experience across industry, Darren helps companies create real, lasting change. Darren, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I think we were introduced by Jesse Rendon. Is that correct?
That's right.
All right. Wonderful. We'll have to say thanks to Jesse and give a little shout out to him. So thanks, Jesse.
Absolutely,
Appreciate the introduction.
And you had a great podcast with him as well.
Wonderful. Well, if you listen to the previous podcast, you know, we like to start out with a question about the spark. The spark is that moment where the fire was maybe lit for you in this continuous improvement discipline. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you first get your interest in this continuous improvement discipline?
Well, I'd have to go way back, believe it or not. I'd go way back to even my college days. So before I started college, by the way, my degree is in industrial engineering, right? And before I started school at my college, they had basically like every engineering department would have speakers that explain what they do, right? So you go to each one, mechanical, all of these, computer science, all that. In the industrial engineering and operations research department, the person that was presenting, and I don't remember who it was, that was a very long time ago, you might imagine, said, well, industrial engineering and operations research is really about getting the biggest bang for the buck. It's like, how can we get more out of the resources we have? And I just found that fascinating. So before I even became a freshman officially, I knew that's what I wanted to do. Now that's not lean or Kaizen or anything like that yet. So that dates back to, of course, the last century, in the early 90s at that point. But then later in that decade, really, I had my second job was working for a small consulting firm who was looking for an industrial engineer. And the primary role was really all about lean and Kaizen. And that's where I really learned a lot of the lean and Kaizen specific tools and skills. In industrial engineering, you do learn a lot of, you learn about Kanban, you learn about a lot of these things, but you don't really learn, well, how do I implement that? How do I facilitate that? How do I teach that? So I was very fortunate to have this small company. I was out here in California and they had a huge client out here. And that's why they hired me in the first place. But they taught me a lot at that time. And I actually got to the point with them where I was facilitating Kaizen events, and I just loved that. That's what I knew I wanted to do. So my goal at that point was eventually I want to start doing this on my own or with my own consulting company. I didn't do it right away. I worked for a couple of other companies really doing that type of work, but internal to those companies. And that was great. But I knew, when the opportunity came, I was going to leave and do this because I just love it. That's what I want to do 100% of the time. So I left a company. I volunteered for a layoff in 2003. 2003, early 2003. And in April of 2003, started EMS Consulting Group. So it was 22 years ago.
Wow.
And since then, it's been a really exciting ride. Started out primarily just in manufacturing and a lot in med device because I knew I had a lot of contacts in that area. And then eventually I got into all kinds of fields, healthcare, finance, pretty much any industry you can think of over this 22-year period. So it's been a great ride, but my spark really started that way back then
I
when I
find
was
that
a
so
teenager,
interesting. And again, that's one thing I really love about this discipline is how there's kind of that's, we call it the spark, but it's that like thing inside of all of us that just kind of like drives us to do stuff. I mean, of course, we're all interested in working for money and doing things that'll get us paid, but there's something really fun and kind of magical when you find something that lights you up as a human being and that you find interesting. When you can find a way to make a living at something that is interesting to you, man, that's like the trifecta. So that's very
it
cool.
is. Yeah.
Where were you at school when that happened?
I went to, I'm from the East Coast, and I went to Columbia University School of Engineering and Applied Science. So you pretty much picked, I knew I wanted to be in engineering. I wasn't really sure when I was in high school about industrial engineering necessarily, but I went there and that's when I decided. I was already, like I said, I wasn't officially a freshman, but I knew once I went through those different ones, I said, this is for me. This is what I want to do. So I even got to, because as a senior, you have to do a project and it's a group project. And in industrial engineering, it's like a consulting project that's industrial engineering related, like how to make things more efficient. And I remember of course, it was in New York and it was for the electric company there, power company, which is Con Edison. And I remember going back and forth there with some colleagues and we were working on making some improvements for that company. That was, I guess you could say, my first consulting gig. It was unpaid, but it got me my diploma.
That's awesome. So from Columbia, I thought I saw like San Diego University on
Right.
your bio also. How did
Eventually
you
I
end up
got
on
an
the West Coast?
MBA. Yes. And eventually I got an MBA at San Diego State. After college, I got a job out here in California. And then a couple of years after that, I started MBA. I started doing my MBA, but I did it part time while I was working. I started doing that while I was at the consulting company that I mentioned before. But that took, I think I did it I think it was 3 years or four, just part time, like at night. And that helped me as well. I actually studied a lot on entrepreneurship and things like that. I didn't do too much with operations management, which was an option. I did a couple of classes there, but I had so much of that earlier. I just wanted to focus on maybe some other skills, entrepreneurship and finance and things like that, which I also use in my consulting. So it worked out pretty well.
That's awesome. I did an MBA myself, and that's where I got maybe not introduced for the first time, but definitely like learned some lessons of supply chain and got introduced to the book The Goal and some of these
Yes.
things that are very much connected to this improvement discipline. Not everybody has time to go do an MBA, but if you're interested in that kind of thing, I mean, even something like a Greenbelt course, man, you can learn so much about, like, I would almost call like a Greenbelt certification like a little mini MBA. So if you have an opportunity to do one of those, I mean, I'm a big fan of learning that methodology. So
Well, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we teach those, and the goal really is to get people to understand how to use the discipline, how to actually take, if it's green belt, how to take the DMAIC problem solving process and really apply it. So it really needs to require a hands-on activity where you're actually taking a project through problem statement all the way through and having some kind of impact. And if you do that multiple times, then you start to understand that process better. I do think there might be some cases where people just learn it kind of book knowledge, but I think the application is really, really important. I mean, even like I mentioned, even when I was in college, they made you do a project. So I
this is
think
an
that's
interesting, I
important.
think this would be a
Yeah.
great subject to dive into a little more
Yeah.
detail here. The definition and the idea of a project, right? Like, I mean, if you're in this discipline, it probably makes more sense to you. But for, let's say, somebody who's kind of casually on the periphery of this continuous improvement thing, how would you describe a project? Like, if you tell somebody, hey, we're going to teach and train you this, and then you're going to have to go do a project, what does that mean?
Well, it's really about finding a specific problem or opportunity within the organization that you work. And it should be a genuine opportunity where they're actually, if you implement this, it's going to have some business impact. Part of all the project charters, which is where you define what your project is. Ours always include, and most that I've seen always include a business case, right? Like, why are we doing this? So it should have impact. And if you're doing a project, you're leading typically a team, depending on the scope of the project, through what I would call a problem solving process. Now, when I say that, it doesn't necessarily need to be the case that it's a problem where you need to get back up to a standard. It may be, but it's also innovation. It's like, how do we get to that next level? We need to improve productivity by 20%. We need to improve our quality and reduce our scrap rate, or we need to turn our service around faster. Our turnaround time needs to be faster to be more competitive. So it really depends on what the problem is, but you're going to be actually leading up. Typically for a green belt, it would be like a small scale project through improvement all the way to implementation and follow up or control. If you're in the lean six sigma or Six Sigma space, it would be control. But in any case, whether you're doing an A3 lean type of approach, Toyota TPS type of approach, you're still going to have that follow up at the end. And the process is the way I teach it, I teach both. So people ask, well, are you for Lean Six Sigma? Are you like a pure lean or a TPS? Really, to me, I teach all of that because it really depends on a lot of times on the client and what their preference is. But the reality is I'm going to teach it the same way in terms of I want them to have the discipline of how to think through and solve problems. And it really doesn't matter whether you're using DMAIC or A3. It doesn't make any difference in reality if you can think through that process and you have a disciplined process. That's half the battle, I think. So I don't know if I over answered that question, but
No, that was awesome, and just for your sake and the listener's sake, we use a lot of acronyms on this
yes,
podcast, and so sometimes I like to just pause and clarify the definitions of some of these things.
sure.
You talked about DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control, and A3, which you typically refers to a size of paper, like a
That's right.
constraint for the presentation of the problem-solving format, and
Right.
PDCA, plan, do, check, act. And all of those are basically like structured problem-solving approaches where you're applying a methodical approach to solving a problem, which I think that's kind of the common thread to what we're
Exactly.
doing here. I like what you said about, if somebody were to ask you, well, which is better, PDCA or DMAIC, how would you respond to that?
Well, the thing is, no matter what, as long as you have a good problem solving process that's disciplined, that goes from defining the problem thoroughly through investigation and analysis to get to the top critical causes or root causes, and then systematically come up with a solution, implement that solution or set of solutions, and then control it, which all of those would have. I think you can use any of those. I really don't think in reality one is really that superior. I mean, they all have their benefits. Some people say DMAIC is easy because it's easy to remember, right? Whereas like a Toyota 8-step, it's harder to remember. Maybe,
Yeah. What are
but if
those
you
eight
do it
steps
enough, you'll
again?
remember it. But in reality, they all have the same parts to them. Maybe some of them are combined into one step. Like you mentioned A3, right? Now you've probably seen all kinds of different A3s. I've seen some that are only like 6 boxes on the A3. I've seen some that are 8 and 9. 9 was, I think, the most I've seen, but they all have the same thing in there. It's just how you divide it, but you're still thinking through the process and the problem the same way. As long as if you are, then you're going to be successful, right? And it's not the one trap that any of these that you can fall into is like using these things as just a template to fill in and not really solving the problem, right? Just go like get this A3 template and say, okay, I'm going to fill this in and I solved the problem. But I didn't really think through it. I kind of just jumped to a solution. And that's where I think a lot of people fall down in that process.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like, I think a big part of this work is solving the problems, and it's a thinking process. It's like if you give someone the answer, but you don't let them benefit from the thinking, it's like, have you really, done the job? So I think that's an important point that you make, that how important it is to use these as frameworks for thinking, not just an output.
Exactly. That's it. Exactly. Right. Because it's all about thinking. And I've heard people refer to the Toyota production system as the thinking production system. People within Toyota say that because that's really what it is. It's like, how can you think critically through a problem solving process to make an improvement. And there's all a bunch of tools you can use, but if you don't have that process for thinking it through and you haven't practiced that and you're not disciplined at it, you're not going to be as successful, right? That's really what it boils down to for me.
I really like that. I mean,
Yeah.
I've heard about the TPS, the Toyota Production System, but the way you just connected that landed for a little differently for me. It's the thinking production system. That's great. I have heard the quote that people don't come to Toyota to work; they come to Toyota to think.
Yes. Yes.
And you know what's funny? I mean, we're recording this in October of 2025, so who knows when people will be listening to it. But right now, AI is like everything, everywhere. There's this big, thing hanging over all of us that AI is going to take all of the jobs. And one thing that I find really interesting is this structured problem-solving approach is like a set of tools for implementing AI. Oh, it's like you gotta learn how to think and learn how to solve the problems. And the other day I had a kind of an interesting epiphany where I went to the gym with some friends of mine, and I was thinking back 100 years ago, they didn't even have gyms, right? Like we all, everybody had like these manual jobs where they got their muscles worked out every single day. And then here we are in 2025 and we have to like pay money to go lift heavy stuff. And I thought, I was kind of like looking forward and I was like, I wonder what it's going to be like 50 years from now if we're all going to go to these like mental gyms where we like get a chance to think because now the AI does all the thinking work. And so we just go do it for fun. So I like that idea of how important that thinking problem solving is for us as humans and just our enjoyment, with our work and just the fulfillment of the human spirit, you might say. That's a great
Yeah.
insight.
I think good. That's a good way of putting it for sure.
So Darren, let me ask you this. So you're doing work as a consultant now. If somebody, what are some questions that somebody might ask to think like, hey, should I be calling Darren or somebody, maybe in my area to help with our business? What are some of the business problems that someone like yourself could solve for a company?
Okay. So, we're usually dealing with situations where, let's say, a company needs to be more competitive in terms of turnaround time or delivery to their customer, right? And that can be a service or it could be a manufacturer, a product based company. So that's one area, right? Their costs may be increasing, right? For example, it could be defects that are costing them too much money. They actually, like right now, I'm working with a biotech where their problem is they're growing really fast and they want to be able to keep up with that growth without necessarily doubling their workforce as they double in size, right? How can we'll increase our workforce, but at a slower rate, but we need to be more productive in order to do that. You may even have a company that's more struggling. They're getting to the point where they're losing money and they need to, how do I start making money in this business? What's wrong? And we can kind of diagnose what's going on with the business financially, where we can help you improve your operations and turn that around. A lot of different kinds of problems, but when we talk about the general like approach to problem solving and things like that, we like to help organizations develop that internally so that their leadership thinks that way and that their leadership can also coach the individuals that and their staff to start thinking that way, because then you have a multiplier effect rather than just having, initially maybe you have an outside person come in and give you and help you develop a strategy and find some big opportunities, but really you want to have an internal capability, and that becomes so powerful, right? Once you have an organization where people are all sort of thinking in terms of problem solving and not jumping to solution or the typical approach to things, it has a huge multiplier effect. And then that company can grow faster. They're going to be a lot more competitive because they're going to outthink their competition. Right. And that's what we want to get to. But really the kind of problems that we find really vary quite a bit as to what kind of problem they're experiencing currently or why they would want to reach out to us. Sometimes they just want, or they think they just want training. And when they do that, a lot of times I'll ask them, well, why do you want training? What is it you're trying to accomplish? And then we can figure out the best way to help you accomplish that.
Yeah, that's great. You said something about like capabilities and that strikes me as something that everybody building a business, everybody building a company, heck, everybody building a family, if you've got kids, We all want our kids to grow up to be like capable human beings.
course.
We want them to still like, come visit us at, it's just I guess we want them to still need us a little bit, but we want them to be like self-sufficient. I think in companies, if you hire a junior intern, your hope is that that person can become proficient. You won't have to tell them what to do all day, every day. Right. And I think that that just expands up through the company. So when somebody comes to you and says that they're looking to improve the capabilities inside their company, what does that look like in terms of some of your offerings? Like what kind of things might you do with them?
Okay, so yeah, and that does happen quite a bit where they're saying, "Hey, we really need to build our capability." And sometimes they know to solve problems, to make improvements. We want our people doing that. So it's usually a combination of things that we would do for them. First of all, we'll kind of assess the situation and understand, well, what capability level do they have right now? How do their people think and operate, right? So that's a baseline. But then in terms of things like training and coaching, we provide a combination of those things. And we do it in different ways depending on what the client needs and where their current situation is. Like right now, we're working with a pretty large pharmaceutical company that's in Boston, and we're primarily giving them a combination of e-learning, virtual live training, where we actually work with teams of people that are actually going to become green belts by working through problems. And then we also provide them with some coaching, right, to those individuals so they can start to solve problems, get some feedback on what their approach is, because the coaching, when it comes to problem solving, is really about assessing how are they thinking and how do I help them to start thinking in the right direction, right, in terms of problem solving. So there's always some one-on-one coaching. So typically a combination of training, coaching, some assessment that we might do. And we provide that. Like I said, we do live training, we do it virtually. We also do live in-person training, and we do coaching, and that's typically virtual, like a Zoom type of a thing. So it's a combination of things, but really it starts with kind of assessing what is their situation and finding out and setting with them what their goals are, trying to determine, okay, what is it that we want to achieve? And again, once people see, or once leaders see that they can have an organization that's full of people that can really think through problems, their eyes are open. It's like, wow, okay, what a difference, right? I'm not having to tell them what to do. And very often they even need to learn that process, to be honest. A lot of times they are also jumping to solution and they need direct coaching on that as well. So their eyes open in that way as well. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's one thing that I always find interesting about this discipline with every company I've ever worked with. Every company needs more people that can solve important strategic problems, Like, I mean, in the news lately, we're hearing about layoffs at this company or that company. And every time I hear about some big, massive layoff, I think, wow, if somebody inside that company would have done a little better job at like figuring out what the problems to solve earlier were, how could things be different? It's always kind of
Right.
sad.
Right. And though, that's a short term, usually very poor solution,
Yeah.
these layoffs. And I know for a public company, when they do a layoff, you see their stock price go up because it's like, oh, wow, they're going to save all this money. But in reality, a lot of these companies go through cycles where they lay off and then several months later, they're going to have to hire again. And it's going to cost them a lot of money to retrain new people, get them on board. A lot of learning is lost. So it's such a bad cycle. It's much better to find out what's going on up front, solve the problems, and maybe in the short term, you might have a little bit of pain, but in the long run, it's going to be much better for you rather than, letting all of this potential brain power go. Because that's another thing where people a lot of times, well, you don't know our people. They're not going to think like that. They're not going to understand this stuff. And it's like, no, I guarantee you they can. Very often I hear that. And even with especially with like frontline, they'll tell us, oh no, they'll never understand how to create flow or how to do this kind of stuff. And I said, give me a chance. I think I can make it happen, because I've seen it so many times, but a lot of times, they don't have enough faith in their own people, and they should, but
That right there
eventually
is
we'll get
such
them there.
a good soundbite, like that's such a reoccurring theme. And again, like knowing something versus doing something is two different things. Cause I'm sure every leader and every consultant who's said this, we've probably all been guilty of like, yeah, well, it's different here.
That's right. Absolutely.
When it comes to the training, people have different opinions on whether they should subscribe to like the typical like white belt, green belt, black belt, the belt system. When you do training, do you recommend those kind of labels? Do you do something different? What's your approach like?
We don't necessarily recommend those labels. Sometimes a company, let's say the hiring individual or the buyer, my contact at the company may say, I want to do green belt or I want to do, but even if that's the case, we always customize it specifically for the company because to me, the label is not really that important. And sometimes I'll work with the company and say, well, these are the capabilities you need to build based on the type of organization you have. And we'll just come up with a program and it will require them to do some hands-on work, of course, and they'll just go through that program. In other cases, I'll have companies say, I want green belt or I want, certain black belts in this organization. Say, okay, rather than just subscribing to, well, here's what the body of knowledge is, want that, we can include all of that. Like, even if they don't need it, I would say do it as like an e-learning or something like that. But the stuff that they really need, we need to really make sure that they learn that and practice it. There are obviously companies out there, types of organizations where they're not really going to use much, say, design of experiments, right? But then there are others, like I mentioned, the pharma company out in Boston, where they are going to use that. They use it regularly. So that's something they are using. But maybe I'm working with an insurance company or a finance company. They're really not going to use that. You may see some examples where they really stretch out how it might be used, but it's a waste. It's not something they're going to learn. So we would create a program that's really customized to what they need. Now, the common thread, of course, is that they're going to have to learn the problem solving process. And then there are some tools that are so general, anyone can use them really in any type of organization. And then there are some where you're really not going to be using.
So Darren, I'm kind of curious to go down this path of, again, part of our mission with this podcast is to, if I was selling anything on this podcast, it would be to convince people that this continuous improvement discipline is something worth sinking your teeth into even more. Like it's just, just the whole concept of it. So, with that kind of goal in mind, if you look back on some of the people that you've taught and some of the people that you've trained on this, I'm sure there's probably a few that were like standouts, like, man, this person got it from day one. It's always fun to kind of see the light bulb moment go on. Is there something that you might be able to relate about if you're the kind of person that likes this, or if you're the kind of person that likes that? Like, what are some of those personality traits to look for, to pull people into this discipline?
Well, typically, there's two aspects to it. So one, I think, is having a questioning mind, right? Or an inquisitive mind where you're really, really thinking about things a lot and saying, okay, why is it this way? Why is this the way it is? Some people just tend to have that personality where they want to, they have a desire to change things, right? So they want to know why it is this way. Let's change it, right? And I notice people that have that mindset are definitely going to be interested in and are very likely to be successful in the continuous improvement side. The other side to it, and I think you can learn this, is if you're going to become a continuous improvement professional, whether you do consulting or you work as a CI manager or, within an organization, you're going to have to be able to work really well with people, facilitating groups and things like that. And that, I think, just takes practice. Some people tend to have a knack at that. I didn't know I had a knack at that until my boss at the consulting company said, you really are good at this. I had no idea because that wasn't anything that I ever did before. But anyone, I believe, can learn that. Even these people that would say, well, I'm really afraid to speak in front of people, probably has said that at some point. But the reality is, if you practice it enough, if you do it enough, then it really doesn't, you don't think about it anymore. Even in front of large groups, you just don't. And I never did any kind of like Toastmasters or any of that. You could do that, I suppose, but I never did. And I wasn't like the most outgoing person or anything, not even close. But I'm very comfortable and really just by having done it enough times. So I think that you just need practice at that. So it's the two pieces to it. It's the people being comfortable speaking in front of people and facilitating groups and things, and then having that questioning mind where you're really thinking, well, why is that? Don't accept things necessarily. Ask why. And you want to have a bias toward changing things, right? You want to make them better. If you have that desire to do that, I think CI is definitely is for you. It's a discipline for you.
I like that. If you're curious and if you don't like things that suck.
Right. You're like, I just can't stand the way it is. There are people that'll look at things and say, this is just wrong. I can't let you keep doing it this way. And they'll just volunteer, hey, this is how you should, I think you should do it this way. But those kind of people are going to be good at CI. But then we need to teach them how to work with other people to get them to think that way rather than tell them just what to do. Right. Because as a facilitator and a teacher, you don't really want to tell them exactly what to do. You want to teach them how to think so they can do it, right? Like teaching them to fish rather than just fishing and giving them
I love that analogy, right? I love that analogy. It's always faster to just give someone a fish,
much
right?
easier.
Like we all just want the fish right now, but we know that it's better to learn to fish, right? So you always have to decide like how much time am I willing to spend learning to fish versus just give me the fish.
Yes. And that's a struggle for leaders too, where they'll
Yeah.
say, I don't have time for this. I want to just give them the solution. Like I'm working right now with another company that's, well, it's sort of local. They're in the LA area and they're actually in recycling, which is interesting. But what their struggle is, how do I balance making a lot of things happen quickly with having my people really learn to do this rather than telling them how to make these improvements. So it's kind of a challenge, but you definitely need to have the patience to let people even fail sometimes. I know that sounds terrible. It's like, oh, you're going to let them fail? Yeah, you are, because you are going to learn from that failure, right? It's not catastrophic if they think this way and then no, that was wrong. Good. Now they've learned from that and you can use that as a teaching opportunity. I mean, obviously there are things that you have to avoid that are major concerns, but generally speaking, you actually do need to let them try things and fail. You don't always have to be like, they say helicopter parent, like a helicopter leader, right? No, you can't. I'm not going to let you do that. Let them do some things as long as it's not, anything
Yeah.
obviously really dangerous or anything like that. I just mean, let them try this out. Well, I think if we move this over here and we run it this way, I think it's going to work. Okay, let's run that experiment and let's see if it works. You don't have this, you may be wrong too. I mean, that's another thing. Leaders don't often think that they're wrong, but they may be. Very often they are. So,
Yeah, that's so interesting.
that's,
I like that helicopter parent analogy. That's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
So with that, I think as a leader, a lot of times it comes down to, okay, there's this scale where I'm okay with allowing a certain amount of this and then a certain amount of it's not okay. Like I want to give my people time to be creative and think, but in a 40-hour work week, I'm not going to give them all 40 hours. Like I need certain things done. So do you have like a framework or a rule of thumb that might apply even at different levels of the organization? Like how do you create that space to try things and how's that different at like different levels of the organization?
Well, I think what you have to do, there's a couple of things that I think you need to do. One is you can have goals and timelines for those targets, right, that you want to reach. But how they get there, the in between, they need to have some room to experiment, to run some experiments. Like one of the things that I like to use as a framework is the improvement and coaching kata, which is Mike Rother's creation. I think it's brilliant because what it does is it allows you to experiment toward the goal, right? But you always have a goal that you want to reach that's within a target that you want to reach that's typically, say, within the next 30 days or something, right? But over that period, you're having a one-on-one coaching with typically with your boss, where the leader is coaching you through the problem solving process, but it's hand holding, but it's not telling you what to do. So it's allowing you to run these experiments, but you're getting some course correction. So you don't just leave them on their own and say, okay, go experiment for a month and let's see what happens. You're giving them coaching, but you're not telling them what to do. So I think you need to have a framework where you are engaged with them as a leader, but you're not telling them what to do. And that's difficult for a lot of leaders, because for people, that's difficult. I don't want to say it's just for leaders, because you have this tendency to want to tell them, here's the answer, here's what you should do. And then they're not going to learn from that. So you have to have that. You have to have some kind of framework like that. As far as like frontline people and letting them come up with ideas and things, I think you need to have a system where you can collect these ideas and then have a process for discussion, evaluation, and then as a like a lead or a supervisor of that area, if it's something that's a quick, simple idea, you want to let them try that. Obviously it should be evaluated a little bit, but let them do it. So it's very important to listen to your frontline people when they identify ideas, problems, things like that, and then allow them to solve it. But like I said, you can't just say, okay, I'll leave you alone for the next month or two. Just go experiment and try to figure it out. There needs to be a back and forth, like a coaching.
Before we go too far past that comment about the COD improvement COD, could you explain that framework for somebody that might not be familiar with that concept?
Okay, so the Mike Rother, I think it was 2011 or some that time frame. I may be wrong about that, but it's within a year or two of that. He wrote a book called the Toyota Kata. And since then, that's really taken off. And there's two kind of aspects to the kata. There's the improvement and the coaching kata, but they go together. The improvement kata is kind of like experimenting using mini PDCAs, right? We talked about PDCA a little bit before, Plan, Do, Check, Act. Really just experiments where we say, okay, here's what my hypothesis is. I think if this is the problem, then if we do this, then we should find this result. So we go in and we run an experiment and we find out, right? And based on that experiment, that's going to inform us for our next step. And the idea of the improvement kata is that kind of ideally every day we're going to take one step. We're going to do one PDCA experiment toward a goal. So that goal might be to get, ultimately, we might want to reduce turnaround time in a process. That might be the long-term goal. But in the short term, we're going to have like a month-long typically target that we want to get to for a particular process, right? So we say, okay, we want to reduce the time it takes to do this activity from X to Y. Currently, it takes 2 minutes. We want to get it down to a minute and a half or something like that, right? And if we do that, then that's going to help us get to our longer term goal. So we experiment toward that goal, right? So we're going to be following our problem solving process. So we have our problem, our current condition, our target condition, and we start to look at what Mike Rother would call obstacles. Those we might also call all those causes, right? Things that are preventing us from getting to our target condition. So we identify those just like a normal problem solving process. And then we're actually experimenting to find out, well, which of these causes are the critical causes? Which are the ones that are actually the ones that are preventing us from reaching our target condition? So we run these experiments. And once we find out, say that this one and this one are really the key ones, then we come up with countermeasures. Again, just like our problem solving, it is our problem solving process. And then we experiment on the countermeasures. Okay, so we think this countermeasure is what we're going to try. Okay, let's trial that. So we run an experiment. And eventually, by the end of that month, the goal is to have reached that short term target. The coaching kata is the daily discussion with your coach, right? And it's basically framed around 5 questions, the 5 questions of the coaching kata, which is what's the target condition, which is that month long, end of the month or end of the next 30 days, this is where we want to get to. What's our current condition now, our actual condition, right? Where we are now. And then we say, what are the obstacles and which obstacle are we working on now? So we may have a list of obstacles. I think Mike Rother has like a parking lot of obstacles. You might use, a fishbone diagram. It really doesn't matter, but you'll have these, and then we're focusing on this one. And then what's our next step or next experiment? What is it that we're actually going to be doing? And we record that. So we say, okay, this is the test. This is the experiment we're going to run. So we find that out. And then we say, okay, what do we expect to learn from that experiment? So again, depending on what it is, if it's testing a cause or an obstacle or testing a countermeasure to see if this is working, we expect to find that out, right? So we write that down and then we run the experiment. And then when you're interacting with the coach, they're asking that question and they want to know what you've learned, right? So from yesterday when we ran that experiment, what did you learn? Now, today, you're going to run this other experiment. What are we going to learn? And does that make sense? Now, the coach's job is to evaluate the thinking of the person running these experiments and doing this project or whatever you want to call it, problem solving. So as the coach, if I were doing this, I would be evaluating, how are they thinking? Does this make sense? Are they jumping to a solution? Are they actually following a problem solving process the right way? Right? Are they drawing the right conclusions from their experiments? So we would be sort of thinking that through. And by having this daily discussion, this daily coaching, which might be like a 15 or minute or even less discussion, we're able to keep it on track, right? So that it's not just, here's your monthly target, go figure it out and hope that they're learning from it, because odds are they're probably not. So it's kind of these two aspects. It's a framework for improvement, and it's a coaching framework for discussion to make sure that they're on track.
I like that. Aaron, I want to ask you to like restate the 5 questions of the coaching kata.
Yeah. The 5 questions of the coaching kata are: what is your target condition, which is, like I said, out, say 30 days typically. And then what is your actual condition now? So what number are we at right now? For example, it should be measurable. The third thing is, what obstacles are preventing us from reaching our target condition? And part of that question is also, which one are we working on now? Because we can't work all of them at the same time. Then the next question is, what is our next step or experiment? What are we going to do next? And what do we expect to learn from taking that step? So that's 4. And then the fifth one is, when can we go and see what you've learned from taking that step? And that is really more motivational. It should be the next day, right? It should be tomorrow when we meet, we're going to take that step.
I love that. That was great. I love those 5 questions. How frequently should those be asked? And maybe the answer is different in different situations, but what sort of framework could you recommend?
Typically it's daily, right? So the manager, the leader of that individual that's doing that, let's say that's a supervisor, and that person's manager, is the manager of that group or department. Every day they're going to be asking that question, generally speaking. Now, there are cases where, just by nature of the business, it may not really be possible to do daily experiments, but we really want you to do that. Then the reason we want you to do that is because of the practice, right? It can't be like monthly or something, because then you're only going to get 12 chances a year. That's not really enough. So ideally, it should be every day. And those questions, it's a really quick, it may only be, like I said, about 15 minutes discussion. And there may be some other questions that you ask as the leader or as a coach to get them kind of course corrected if necessary. But if it's not necessary, then great job, just keep going. You don't need it. So it may even be a shorter discussion.
So those questions sound somewhat similar to something that you might do in like a daily huddle. Would you recommend those as part of a daily huddle, or is that more part of like a one-on-one coaching session separate from like
No,
work?
it can be used for that as well. It's something that I would encourage leaders to memorize. It's really simple, some version of that, because you can ask those questions and really learn a lot about how people are approaching the problem that they're solving. So it's a great question, even when a leader just goes out to the floor, they want to do like a really general Gemba walk, right? And they want to go to an area and, learn what they're doing in that area, and what problems they may be working on. Those are really good questions to ask. That's a really simple framework. But in my view, it was genius as he came up with this. I think Mike Rother is one of the greats, really, because as you probably know, he came up with, or at least he half authored the book Learning to See. So I credit him with value stream mapping, which was a huge deal at the time in the late 90s. And then now, and more recently, not now, but I guess that was like 14 years ago, coming up with the Toyota Kata. Very brilliant, you know. And he's sort of a humble guy and how he presents himself, but he's a genius in my view, because I think these are two of the very most important things that have been developed in the last 25 years or so with lean.
That sounds like a really terrific set of questions. Like, if you want to be a really good coach, you could probably like tattoo those on your arm, or,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I'm thinking of a quarterback that has all the plays written down. Like, have those set of
exactly.
questions ready to go as a coach. That can probably make you a really good coach.
It can, and it'll help you to avoid doing what your nature wants you to do, which is to tell them what to do. you know, Rather than, you're doing it all wrong. Here's what you should do. Here's what the
Yeah.
solution is, which is, you want to avoid that.
I think that a lot of this stuff is really easy for somebody who has some responsibility inside of an organization to say, I want to do it this way. I'm going to implement it. I have my little kingdom. I'm going to go implement this in. But a lot of people aren't necessarily the king of the kingdom inside their organizations. If you are, that's wonderful. But a lot of times you've got like customers, you might say, who are actually your boss, and you've got to kind of manage up inside of an organization.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for like how to implement some of this stuff in a managing up sort of way? Like what if somebody's in a situation where they feel like they're being not managed well? Any way that you might have
Well,
advice you might give?
it is difficult. It is difficult to do this. But what I would say is if they can learn for themselves the problem solving process and thinking and practice it themselves, they can sort of become a mini superstar in that organization, right? Because they're going to have like a superpower that other people don't have. Because if it's not happening in that organization, they can actually stand out quite a bit. So it can help them, it could potentially help them career wise, but to try to implement it from the bottom, pushing up and managing up, it's very difficult to do, to convince a manager of that. I have seen, people try to bring us in, at a lower level and say, okay, let's talk with this manager. And, very rarely are you going to be able to make it happen that way. They really have to get that manager thinking in terms of continuous improvement, lean, and problem solving. If they already have sort of a negative attitude toward that, it's going to be hard to do. But an individual can still learn this, and then they can use it for their own purposes in the future. Maybe it's in a different department, in a different organization, whatever, they can still use it. But they're not going to transform the organization. If they can, then they'd be a huge hero, but that's almost impossible, I would
Well,
say.
I think your point about becoming a superstar in your organization is a really good one, because this set of problem solving skills can be applied to a customer's problem. A lot of times it can be applied to your boss's problem. I think that question of what is the target condition, maybe that's the question to ask the boss. Like, what is the target condition? What do you want us to achieve?
Right. Right. Actually, yes, you can use it that way as well, right? So you can understand, well, what is the goal and what's and then showing them, okay, here's how we solve this problem and it works. Like I said, you can definitely, do some good for your own career and maybe along the way convince a manager that maybe there is something to this, but at least for yourself, I think it pays off, to learn that. Even if the organization doesn't use it as a general practice, you can stand out thinking that way and using it.
Yeah, well, I have spoken with a lot of people who are CEOs and leading organizations who were not necessarily founders of the company, who made their way up through the companies through programs that, they had trainings like Greenbelt training. So they worked in operational excellence because it is such a good way to understand strategy and operations and daily management. There's just some really good stuff in there. So I second the opinion of yours that this can be good for your career, certainly.
Yeah, and every company, I mean, obviously with your organization being focused on, KPIs and metrics and things, which is very critical, right? And you have every organization has some metrics that they're tracking and some typically KPIs or some other form of metrics and goals that they use and that they track. What continuous improvement and problem solving does is it kind of gives you a way to reach those goals, right? It's like, how do we do it? Do we cook the books to reach those goals? Do I manipulate things and move, or can I actually make real improvement that will actually affect the company's bottom line while meeting these goals? And I think the problem solving is perfect for it because it's like, okay, here's what our goal is. Here's where we are right now. And how do we close that gap? Problem solving is how we do it. So any company can use it and they really should, but not all of them do. They all
Yeah.
just look at the numbers and say, "Oh, too bad. We didn't we didn't make these numbers. Now let's do a layoff or let's do this, let's try this approach." Well, they're just, throwing spaghetti up at the wall and seeing what sticks. They're not really having a disciplined way of getting there. And that's what the problem solving process
That's
does.
great. Yeah, I love the connection of the goals to the metrics and the problem solving process, certainly. This episode is brought to you by KPI Fire, the all in one platform for continuous improvement. With KPI Fire, you can align strategy, drive execution, and engage your people. So whether you're leading a team or driving enterprise-wide change, KPI Fire helps you deliver real results. Learn more at www.kpifire.com. A few
Yeah.
minutes ago, you talked about or alluded to something that sounded to me like an idea funnel, like a place to track potential projects or ideas. I'm curious if you'd come back to that and explain what that idea is, or how what is that as a concept for people?
I think it's really important at every organization to have a way for everyone, frontline included, to come up with ideas to solve some of the problems they're experiencing. So they have an improvement idea. How do they get that idea to the point where it's actually going to be implemented and someone's listening to them? Because in most organizations, right, people may have ideas. Maybe they mention it to their supervisor and it doesn't go anywhere. And they figure, well, no one's listening to me. So now I may have ideas, but I'm not going to say them anymore because no one cares. So what you need is a way to get those ideas out there. Now, traditionally, you might have something as simple as a whiteboard, right? Where people write down an idea on a Post-it or some kind of ticket and put it up there. And then when you have your huddles, you can discuss those ideas. So at least now the idea is being verbalized. It's out there. And then that can be digital as well, but it needs to be discussed. It needs to be understood to the individual that, hey, this idea is actually being considered. They need to be able to know that, so they'll come up with more, and then maybe even tying it to rewards. I've seen one of the most creative ones I saw many years ago with this was when people came up with ideas, and if that idea was implemented, what they would do is take your picture and put it up on the wall. Now that sounds kind of boring, but when the wall is full, they would give the entire plant half a day off. So that's pretty good incentive, I think. That was a pretty good idea. But the idea, you can also have like just individual reward systems and things like that. But for ideas that are implemented, you should get some incentive as well. But it's more important even than that is just being able to get the idea heard, right? So they know that it's being considered. And then if it's something that can just be implemented really easily, encourage them to implement it, right? Because I think one of the worst things you can do is not listen to your people. They get frustrated, right?
Yeah.
So you need to allow them to do that. And then it's going to generate more and more ideas that you wouldn't have
How
thought.
does an organization handle that scenario where an idea is submitted, but for whatever reason, like they can't do it right now? Like what do you think is important to not create that sense of, well, I shared an idea once and they didn't listen, so they must not care?
Right. I think if that's the case, let's say they come up with an idea, it sounds good, but for some technical reason or whatever it might be, it's not possible now. I think you need to communicate that back to them and explain to them and actually thank them for the idea at least, right? And say, this was a great idea. We can't use this idea right now for this reason. And even encourage them, hey, can you think of some alternatives to this? Because this problem that we need to solve is a valid problem. It's just that this idea is not a possibility. Because again, they really need that outlet to be able to say, to feel like people are listening to me. Every idea I come up with is probably not going to work, of course, but at least they're telling me, they're not just blowing me off, just saying, I don't care. You just do your job. Related to that, I had a client, this is again is a fairly old client. They were a med device client, great company, but they had in one of their production cells that we were setting up, they had this very small drilling operation. It was a small machine, very small. So you think of drilling, the parts are tiny. So it's like a very small machine, not a super expensive machine, but it really wasn't functioning properly. It was broken, more or less, and they had to do like workarounds to make it work. And when I saw that, I said, well, have you brought this up with them or have you, said anything about this? And they said, oh, we always mention it, but nobody cares. So we stopped mentioning it. It's like, it's just a frustrating part of the job. So I actually tried to find out, okay, from the manager of that area, why haven't you done anything about this? And the answer that I got, eventually they did it right away, but the answer I got was, well, it's not high enough on the list of projects. This is a fairly inexpensive thing. And you can't even measure the frustration that you're giving these people, and we can get more productivity out of it anyway. So you probably have an extra person in that cell just troubleshooting that you can put somewhere else, because this was a growing company. So we solved that problem. But those kinds of things where they don't feel like they're being heard, you really can't overstate that. It's just so bad.
That's so interesting. I think there's kind of two directions I want to go with that with this next question. One of them is, how do you solicit ideas from people that are useful? Kind of, I guess where I'm thinking about this is there a difference between ideas that are in my circle of influence versus like ideas for what other people in the company should go do?
Right,
Have you
right.
seen that?
I mean, what we try to encourage within like a frontline, say a cell or a line or something where we have frontline workers there, is they can come up with ideas. Ideally, they should be for that area. But if they have an idea that applies somewhere else, as long as it's continuous improvement minded, it shouldn't be things. And that's why we like to make them visible, because you avoid some of these things. It shouldn't be things like about their own parking spot or things like that really don't have anything to do. I think we should have an employee of the month parking spot or something, which isn't good or bad. I'm just saying it's really not about continuous improvement. So I think by making them visible, you also avoid the kind of ideas that are really not really relevant, that people might drop in like a suggestion box, which I'm not for. I think you need to make them visible. I think that's really important.
So I think I'm picking up on something. You're saying that an idea funnel or a project hopper is not a suggestion box.
Yes, it's very different. A suggestion box is probably something that should go away. That is not a very good thing. It never works the way people envision it. But if it's something we can make visible and encourage people, and actually we're teaching them, these are the kind of waste that we want to eliminate. We teach them those things. Then we will be able to be successful with it if it's visual and it has feedback. Suggestion box is neither one, right? Because you put it in there, who knows who looks at that, right?
Yeah.
Now, you may have a process at the company where they do look at it, but you don't know as a frontline person. You're thinking, I'm just going to put whatever I think in there, like you should. Yeah, it's something, a lot of times it's irrelevant sort of things or crazy, even crazy ideas. They figure no one's looking at it anyway.
What have you seen work in terms of making that input for ideas? Because obviously, like, somebody says, "Hey, I want to hear your ideas," and there's like this opportunity, this moment where those can be captured. But have you seen anything successful where people have implemented a system or a process for collecting those,
Yeah, I
in an
mean,
ongoing way?
the simplest ones I've seen, the simplest ones, like I mentioned, are ones that stay close to the area that you're in. So you would write this, and it should be written down or, like I said, somehow visible. So if they write it down and then there's a place that they can put it so other people can actually see it. And then at least weekly, there's some discussion about it. So, like when the group, maybe they have a daily huddle, but one of those days, if they don't do it every day, one of those days, we're going to look at these ideas. We're going to just discuss these ideas and what we're going to do with them. Some of them are going to be, hey, just do that. It's a just do it sort of idea. Some of them may have to be further vetted or something like that, or we're going to say, okay, well, this sounds like it's more of a project, or we need to involve IT in this or something like that. But it should always be discussed. And those systems tend to work really well, but that can also be a digital system. It doesn't have to be written down, but we do want to make sure that that gets discussed and it becomes visible. It's not in a box somewhere where no one looks at it except, HR every month or quarter or something.
Yeah, one of the funniest ones I saw. So KPI Fire has a feature for Idea Funnel, of course, and I was reviewing it with a client one time. One of the funniest ones I saw was fix the fan in the bathroom. And I was like, well, that sounds like a great idea. It probably should be done, but I mean,
Right.
maybe more of a
Yeah.
maintenance request. So how do you
Yes.
help guide people between, I mean, there's like different sizes of ideas. And as you're talking about projects in your mental model, where does something go from, yeah, we should just fix the fan in the bathroom, to a project? Where's the line?
Right. I think what you need to do, because again, I'll bring up an example right now. Like I mentioned, I do have a client that's in sort of the recycling space. It may not be, I don't want to get deep into what they do, but one of the things that they've just recently set up that they had hired me to help them with, one of the things that I'm helping them with, is setting up this idea collection and processing system. It's not electronic in this case. But what we did to set it up is to explain, and really, they don't have a huge number of employees, just 100 or so employees, where you really walk them through what are the types of things that we're looking for here. What is like in a process, just kind of the very basics of lean and continuous improvement and what we're trying to accomplish. So when you see this type of thing, here's the kind of ideas we want you to really think through when you experience these problems. What can we do about them? How do we eliminate the waste of motion? How do we eliminate the waste, of moving things around, transporting things, all of these sort of, waiting in a process, all of these wastes that we normally think of. How do we eliminate those? Those are the kind of ideas that we want to capture. Once they understand that, then they're going to come up with those types of ideas. Now, and I would say some of those can be projects, and some of them may be things that they can implement right away within that line themselves, but it should still be brought to attention. It should be discussed. And if it's something that we decide, hey, just do it, great, then just do it. That's wonderful.
I think that's probably one of those areas where, as you talk about like the principles of lean and things like the 8 ways, when you teach people how to think and you kind of remind them of that framework and you teach them what waste looks like and how to identify it, and then you give them an outline for what to do with it when you see it, that's, I think, where you can really connect the dots of the thinking process with the methodology, with the tools. So
Right,
that's
exactly.
all right. Now we're going to move into the rapid fire section. So Darren, the most important job of a leader is to blank.
Help people to think through and solve problems.
Finish this
My quick
sentence,
answer.
and you can restate the
Okay.
sentence too. So like kind of
Okay.
restate and finish. So continuous improvement is,
I would say it's 80% to 90% people and 10 to 20% all of the tools surrounding that. Because it's really about engaging people and teaching people how to think through problems, right? And once you have that, then you have all these tools that you can use, and that's wonderful. But that's what I would say.
do you have a favorite go-to problem solving tool, like device, visual aid, template that you turn to more than anything else?
Well, I don't know if I have a favorite, but I would say one general one that I use is really a set of 4 questions. It's not the kata questions, but it's something I have people ask themselves when they're working on a problem or defining a problem. And that is, first one, and I stole this from Toyota. It's, what do I know? And really, what do I think I know? So I write that down. How do I know that? So how can I be sure that I know it? What data do I have to support that? What do I need to know? Right? Which is, okay, a bunch of different things that I don't yet know. And then how do I find out? And I would kind of like come up with a list of activities that now those become my next steps. So I always encourage people to use that. It's a very simple template or framework.
That's a great set of questions. I love questions. I love sets of questions. That's a great one. I see you got a bookshelf behind you there. Is there a
Yeah.
book that you would recommend somebody interested in this discipline? They should definitely have this book on their bookshelf. Is there one that comes to mind?
Well, one I would say I really like Art Byrne, who was the former CEO of Wire Mold and started and then worked with a bunch of other companies with his where he would buy companies and turn them around. And he wrote a number of books. The first book is really good. They're all good. The Lean Turnaround. I love that book. I think it's a great book. There are many other great books in Lean that I would encourage people to go look at. Obviously, Lean Thinking, which is the classic. The Toyota Way, I still think, is a great book. And another good one is Better Thinking, Better Results by Bob Emiliani, which is about wire mold, which ties back to Art Byrne, but it's a really good book, a classic as well. So there are a number of other good ones too. And if I didn't mention them, please don't be insulted, anyone that's watching this. Hey, how
Hey,
come you
that's
didn't
true. We
mention them?
pinned you down on just name
Toyota
one.
Kata is another one I should mention because I do think that's
Sorry, what was the last one?
right up. Toyota Kata by Mike Rother.
Give us a prediction about the future of continuous improvement.
I think continuous, I've heard, reports about the death of continuous, of lean and Six Sigma and all these things. And I don't think that's going to happen. I predict continuous improvement will become more important, more valuable because of increased competition. And I think the advent of AI will also, I believe, support it. And it'll allow you to think faster, which is a great thing. But if you couple that with the problem solving thinking and you're leveraging AI to help you with that, I think it's going to accelerate. So I actually predict that continuous improvement will grow, but it will be accelerated by AI itself. So I do think there's going to be a relationship.
Ew, I love that. I love that response, and it makes me think about a question I ask internally a lot. Is there something that you've used AI for in the last 7 to 14 days that has made your job as a CI professional like easier?
Yeah, I mean, I use it. I use it very often to create things like create diagrams. Even if I have like a spreadsheet or something from a client that I want to analyze or compare things like that. I mean, all that grunt work type of stuff it can do, and saves you a tremendous amount of time. And I need to learn some more myself about how to tap into it further. But even asking it for ideas. Like one of the things I have done with it once with a client was actually have it rate some ideas that they came up with. And then I went back to the team and said, okay, here's how they rated the ideas. What do you think, in terms of these different criteria? So they actually did a pretty good job, but we did change some things. But yeah, I think there's a lot of uses for it that I personally need to learn some more about, but I can definitely see the potential.
I think that's interesting, and your answer there kind of makes me think about the evolution of change and how change management and how people that are thinking scientifically about the problem and proactively, some of the questions that you mentioned, kind of thinking like an AI bot in the future, like the AI bot is the CEO and it says, fire 40% of the company, right? And then boom, like you've just lost all of this capabilities. I think that, these continuous improvement skilled professional in the future where AI is important plays the role of deciding whether that idea that the AI gave you is a good idea or if there's a better alternative, because AI is great at coming up with lots of ideas, not always the best at knowing which ones should be applied in this situation.
That's right.
Yeah, we'll see how
Right. Because
that
I think the
ages
people
5 years
aspect
from
of it.
now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe this
I think it
podcast will be replaced by an AI bot.
hopefully not. I think this is much better.
Yeah, I think that
Personal interaction's important.
that's great. Um, when with AI or other CI projects, you talked about managing a project. What are the best ways to communicate the impact of an improvement project and improvement effort?
Well, I mean, as an individual, if you're leading a project and you've completed that project, I think obviously you need to, you're going to be presenting that somewhere to your boss or to a steering committee or a management team. But it should get publicized within the organization as well. One of the things I always encourage is having a place, usually electronically, where you can actually keep recordings of people's presentations and allow others to go in and say, okay, let me see what they did. Like one client, even years ago, we used to record all the Kaizen event report outs and put them on the intranet that they had, right? So anyone can go in and say, well, let me see about that. Even if I couldn't attend the report out, I could go back and look at it. And even a year or two later, I might want to see what happened. So keeping it in front of people is very important. And of course, it should be tied to the company's goals, ultimate, high level goals of the organization. So you can actually see that impact, right? So that's also a whole other discussion, but
Yeah.
that's also very, very
No,
important.
that's a very good one. In fact, I want to ask you to come back to and just describe that behavior pattern of the project report out, because I think sometimes, particularly in small companies, people just do things and then they put them on the shelf and move on to the next thing. And the report out, explain what a report out is for a project in that context.
Well, a report out is a way of kind of walking through using your, like, for example, maybe you would use an A3, like a one sheet of paper that kind of it acts as your talking points. And you kind of walk through, here was the problem. Let me explain how we investigated it and what the causes were. And then here's the solution that we came up with and we tested it. And then the results after having implemented, we got our times down from here to here. We got our defect rate down from here to here, and really explain what the business impact is of that. So now that our time has been reduced, we can ship to customers faster, and our on-time delivery, which we had a goal to reach 99.9%, now it's getting closer to that goal. So even explain what the business impact is And really, it's just walking through it. It could be a presentation, it could be a PowerPoint, depends really more on the culture of the organization. But it's important to be able to tell that story because I would consider it, in any case, storytelling, kind of explaining, walking you through the process and storytelling, and then keeping that somewhere. That's what I always encourage. Keep it somewhere so that other people can use it as well, whether they want to learn about that project or how to do a report out. It's also useful to be able to go back and look at it.
I love that. I'm curious if you have like a recommendation for how frequently those report outs should be happening. Is that something that should be happening on a particular schedule, or, like, hey, this year we had a project that got done and then next year we didn't? Or is it something you should try to have like on a regular cadence?
Least quarterly, if not monthly. I had a really good client where we did a large number of projects over a 2 or 3 year period, and they would have like a monthly meeting where they would have each leader talk about project leader, explain where they were in the process, and when they completed the project, they would have their report out there. And I think that's a good cadence, but at least quarterly.
Is it something that you would only do at the end of a project, or would you have report outs like mid project?
In that case, we did mid project as well. So I think that's always a good thing. Depends on the length of the project.
Maybe it depends on how many projects you have to review and how much time you want
Yeah,
to spend
and the
on it.
time. But yeah,
If
yeah.
you don't have a finished project this month, maybe you review one that's open. If you've got too many open ones, you say we're only going to review finished projects, so get them done.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to adjust.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, just a couple more. What does a
All right.
good day at work look like for you?
Well, I mean, to me, it starts with the client. I want the client to be happy, to be satisfied with what we did for them. But a good day at work for me personally, I'm usually working with people, right? That I'm trying to get, and again, I'm trying to ultimately get them to think in terms of problem solving, in terms of improvement. So it's really when lights go on, whether I'm working with a group or one-on-one coaching, when I see the light go on, oh, I get this, right? I see that. That makes me very happy. So that's a successful day for me. But yeah, I guess that's probably the most concise I
That's
can.
great. I guess on the flip side of that, bad day at work, maybe not for you, but for just, maybe clients of yours that you see, like what are the situations that you see people who are maybe having a bad day or frustrated?
Frustrating would be for me to see it would be again usually leadership jumping to and overtaking individuals where they're kind of just telling them what to do, right? Here's the solution I want, or this is what you're going to do, and it kind of or really not listening to their people, any of that kind of thing. Usually, I don't feel bad about that. I don't like to see that kind of thing. It's going in the wrong direction. They're going backwards from where I want to take them.
Okay, so kind of building on that, are there some traits of a good or a successful leader that you appreciate or that you recommend? What are those traits of a good leader?
Well, first of all, they need to be a good listener, right? So a good leader needs to be able to listen. They need to be able to understand what it's like to be in the shoes of the individual that they're leading. That's one thing I think that's important. They really do need to be a good coach and teacher. If they want to be an effective leader, they have to be able to teach other people to solve problems or to fish, right? As we said earlier, right? They need to be able to teach that. They need to be approachable. So I have a few leaders that I have, great respect for that I've worked with as clients, and they have a lot of those qualities. A lot of them are smart, but if you're smart, that's great. And I think that's important. But I think it's really important to be able to do those things because it's all about relating to your people. The other thing I would say great leaders have is that they have a vision for where they want to go with the organization. So that's really, obviously, really important.
So, well, Darren, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. We really appreciate your time and your experience and just appreciate the stories and the very specific details that you shared on building a CI career and a CI continuous improvement culture as well. For our listeners, if you would like to suggest a guest or ask a question or give us any ideas for episodes or content, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Keith C. Norris. Darren, I suppose the same for you. Is there a website that you want to share?
You can find me at emsstrategies.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only person with this name, Darren
Hey,
Dolcemascolo, so you'll Put it in and you'll find me instantly.
Well, you're
You won't have
lucky. A lot of us have like very common names. Well, this concludes this episode of KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. If you have enjoyed today's episode, be sure to add a comment. The comments really help out down in the comments there. So add a little comment, give us a like or a follow on the socials, and share the podcast with your friends or colleagues who are as passionate and interested in continuous improvement as you are. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, keep driving progress and sparking change.